Welcome to another Home Assistant video. Today we will continue the journey in part 2 of my video, Create your first floor plan in Inkscape. We will briefly add a few new elements to our SVG file, and hereafter we will touch some advanced function in Home Assistant floorplan. The elements we will add in the SVG file is our new reload button, the entity element for our TV, and our music area, where we're able to open up a music player and show the state of a given music player as well. This is part 2 of my getting started video. So if this is new to you, please go ahead, find part 1, what's that, and come back to part 2 hereafter. The content of this video will be another time to draw in Inkscape, where we'll add the elements we just saw. We will improve our workflow by adding the loveless reload function provided by BrowserMod. I would like to mention that BrowserMod should be installed in Home Assistant floorplan for you to continue on that point. We will take a look at our hold action and our double tap action, including our hover more filter, our text set service, and our data set service. Here in Inkscape, I will start by adding 2 new layers. The first layer, or actually both of the layers, will be added as a sub-layer of the buttons layer. The first one will be reload, and the next one will be our media button wrapper. In our media button, I will find the asset called music circle. Secure that you have defined the path within the proper layer. Next up will be our reload. I forgot to select the correct layer, so let's move that within that, like so. While we're at it, let's adjust the layer ID. This one will be button.reload. We like to show a state, so let's add that right here as a text element. A prop ID for that one will be buttons, music, text. Like so. Now we'll add a rectangle. The reason why I'm doing this is to have a larger area where my mouse button can trigger the mouse click. The SVG file up here will only be triggered if you're pressing the filled area and not the area within it, which are transparent. So with the rectangle and our music icon here, I think it's time to move the rectangle up in the right layer. And now we can add the ID for that one as well. I will call my rectangle buttons, music, icon. Or the reload button was called button, so let's go with button, music, icon instead. And the text part will be button, music, text. Let's move that to this area. Let's now create a half circle for our TV. A half circle is created by adjusting the end radius to 180 degrees. So start by putting that in, and I will adjust the fill just a bit, so we have the proper one, removing the stroke as well, and do something like this. You can see our layer are added in a place where we don't like it to be. I think I will move mine into the living room area. And now that's in the living room area, I will adjust the entity to entity, living room, TV. So our Inkscape is now updated with our reload button, the music button, including the music text, and our TV entity. And that's it for our Inkscape in this tutorial. So let's now save it and open up Home Assistant, where we will update to our newest home_modern SVG file. First of all, delete the old one if you have any, and upload the new one, like so. Now I recommend you to open up the full path of your SVG file and press Ctrl+Shift+R or Shift F5, that's up to you. You can see my cast is now flushed. So if we're going back to Home Assistant and reloading the page, you can see we have the new floor plan. Please don't mind that I have another SVG file just before with the same buttons, but I prepared this video and therefore you saw my first iteration of that. If you paid attention to my naming, you can see that I was inconsistent. The hyphen is used here, but in our reload button, it's button.reload. I normally recommend you to use another separator than dot, but it's totally up to you. If you're taking a look at our documentation, you will see that we normally recommend you to escape the dots in your CSS files, because the dot itself are referring to a class. So pay attention to that part, but I will ignore it right now, just for you to see the difference between the dot and the hyphen. It's now time to open up the raw configuration editor, and I will show this once, and I think I will skip that in the rest of this video. So open up the raw editor when you're seeing that's on my screen. Okay, cool. That will save you a bit of time when you're watching this. Let's create another element. In here we refer to the button.reload. On the element we will add a tab action. The tab action will fire action called fire DOM event. We'll use the browser mod domain and call the browser mod service called JavaScript. As the data for the JavaScript function, we will push the code called loveless reload, which will help us reloading the loveless resources by just clicking our reload button. So let's save this, close the editor, reload by Ctrl+Shift+R, and try and tap the reload button. You can see here the resources reload every time I press it. So that's a good way for you to improve the workflow and maybe even speed up the development when you're doing your old floor plan. The next thing will be adding the hold action to one of our entities. So let's jump back to Home Assistant. And I will use the light living room primary for that one. So let's copy that. It's time to create a new element. And I will use my entity called light.hue1light. In here I will use the hold action. In this case I think it will be a good idea to just use the more info. I'll just show you how the hold action are working and no more than that. So let's save it, close it and hold it. And as you can see, Hue1 is now opening when I'm holding my mouse instead of clicking. So that's the hold action. The next thing we will take a look at is our double tag action, which we are combining with our Home Assistant floor plan service called execute. I think I will just use the button reload for this one. So let's create the double tap action, which is triggered with a double tap. In here we will create an action called service. Our service will be floorplan.execute, and as our service data, we will just create a key called test01. Floorplan will execute every single of these. Let's prepare this for some raw JavaScript code, like so. And here I will just create a console.log, execute debug info, and I will show you the config key and the home assistant key as well, like so. Let's save it, let's close it, press done, use our reload button, like so. Double tap on that. And here you can see our function is executed and we have access to our config object for Home Assistant floorplan, including the object for Home Assistant itself, which contains plenty of useful informations like states, like services, and other things. So take a look at that at some point and start digging into your own Home Assistant experience step by step. So back in Home Assistant, let's use the light living room primary, and in here add the key which we are calling hover info filter. And in here we can use some of the attributes. One thing could be the friendly name. But it could also be something like the RGB color, the color temperature, and whatever else you would like to exclude from the hover information. Let's save it, close it, press done, use the reload button and hover over. And now you'll see that some of the attributes are now removed from our hover information. That way you can create a more useful information stack by filtering out unused attributes. Before we can continue with the next one, I think it's time to add the mapping to our music button, this one. So let's jump back to our raw editor. So with the music icon, we'll use the entity called mediaplayer.control. That's office, but in Danish. I think I will disable the double tap function. Actually, that's not a default action for this, but this is just for showing you how you can use it if it was a tab action, like so. We could also use a hold action. And in here I would like to show the more info, as we learned before. Let's try and save it, press done, and now hold the button. And as you can see, our media player are now showing up. With the option to opening up the music player itself, and with the knowledge about all the attributes which are below a given entity, including the state itself, I think we should update the text in our SVG element to show if the music player are currently playing or if it's paused. The text was button music text, so let's use that in our code editor. I will go with the same entity as before. And hereafter we will use the state action, which are triggered every time this state is changing for our entity. We will use our Home Assistant action called call service, and the Home Assistant service called floorpan.execute, which are used to update a given text. The service data for this will be a function in JavaScript. I'll recommend you to try and console.log the entity itself, just to see how things are aligned in the object itself, which are exposed in the console window. And the text set are expecting something to be returned as the text we are using to update the SVG element. So in here I will update it with music is currently, let's wrap it like so, where we have a calculated field and use the entity. And in the entity we know we have the state information. So let's try it, save it like so. And you can see that it's now returning music is currently paused. And if you're holding down here and starting with music, you can see the text is updating to show that the music is now playing. You could expand this to something more interesting. Let's reload the informations right here. And let's trigger the state. Oh, we don't have a console log for some reason. Why can that be? Oh, you can see I filtered it by light. That was not my intention. So let's remove that. And here you can see we have media_player.contour. And in here you have things like the state, but also the attributes. You could do something like referring to the attributes.media album name instead. You could also use the playlist or whatever you will like. It's totally up to you, but for this context, we'll just do it as simple as possible. The last thing to touch is our dataset_set function, which are exposing a given entity or whatever you would like to return to our HTML DOM element. I think I will also give you a bit of a chance to better understand how we could use it and maybe even touch the style set option with one advanced function. So let's begin the last step in this tutorial. I will use the light living room primary for the last example, so pay attention to the variables defined in the rectangle. We will change the style and the dataset entity. So in the light living room primary, it's now time to add a state action. I'm just pressing tab to move it up. In here, let's create the first action, which are call service. The action call service. The service will be our floorplan .dataset set, and our service data will be the data key we would like to define, which will be the rgbcolor in this case. It could be anything, but you will see that in just a bit of time. In here we will create a JavaScript function as before. I think I'll just return the entity, attributes, rgbcolor, and save it, close it, done, reload, and let's see how it looks. With data rgbcolor, we have an option to use the value with the dataset commando in JavaScript. The dataset commando are actually just a dump attribute which can be used to get the data out of the attributes to our HTML object. In this case, it's the rectangle. But I'd like you to know that it can be a bit tricky to work with data within the SVG files. Another thing we can do instead of using the dataset_set service is the style set option. And in here we're actually able to create some global values which we can use in CSS. It's pretty smart when you're going to do something a bit more advanced. So in the living room element as well, let's add a new action. And the action for this will be the service called floorplan.styleset instead of dataset set. And here we'll use the service data, which should be named as style. And in here, we'll try to define the RGB color if we have any. First, let's check if we have the entity defined and the entity attributes and the entity attributes.rgbcolor. And if we have that, let's define the RGB color attribute as our RGB color variable, like so, or else return false. It's now time to return the RGB color if it's defined. I'll do it like this. But the cool thing here is that we're able to expose it as a global variable instead in CSS, which will be living room RGB color for our needs, with the RGB color pointing to our variable, like so, or else return nothing. So here I'm expecting a style to be set with our new variable or CSS variable, which we can use when we're styling within our CSS file. It's pretty cool, isn't it? So let's save it, close it, and let's check the results. Well, if your code doesn't work, maybe you have done the same typo as me, like so. So let's save it once again, close it, press done, and see what we get. Here you can see we have a new variable called living room -rgb-color with RGB color. And we can call that from our CSS file. So now we'll open up the CSS file. With our CSS file opening, I would like to mention that I have to attach a whole modern CSS file which has plenty of other use cases for the things we have just worked with. There's also some advanced things on how you can work around in CSS by targeting your ID elements and things like that in plenty of ways. But for this case, we'll just target our living room light. And we'll target it by light, living room, primary. If our entity state is on, in here we'll define a fill where we'll use our CSS variable, which we just defined in home system floorplan. Remember to mark it as important. Let's add a fill opacity of 0.3. And I think I'll go with a opacity of 0 in this case. When we have this, I think it's fine to create a off state as well. We will just use our opacity of 0, or maybe even just correct the fill to a darker color, like so. So let's save that and jump back to our floor plan in 1 second. You will see that nothing has changed because we haven't added the class which are exposing the entity state. So let's add that briefly within the state action. like so. And see if that helps. Now we have the entity state on. Just try and jump back to our file, and we should update this to this. Jump back to modern, reload our entities, and let's see if this works as it should. And here you can see we have the element room RGB defined, but our fill are not updated as expected. And why can that be? Okay, so by poking a bit around, I just spotted this. Let's try and save it. Reload the CSS file. Reload the page as well. And now you can see that we have the information exposed, like so. So our fill is now defined by the RGB color. If we change the fill opacity to 1, you can see that it's trying the best it can to expose our color. If I'm turning this to orange, or the warmer color, you can see it's changing. And if we're changing this to the more bluish area, it's going into white. I hope you're able to see what you can achieve by doing so, and maybe poke around with the opacity. You can also see that the entity state off is now mapped, so it's going totally black. That could be a use case if you are trying to make a logic where the sun is going down, and if there's no light in the room, you can black the room out, or maybe almost black the room out. That's up to you. If you find this useful, please use the comment section and let me know what you have used this for. There's plenty of options, and this is just the beginning on things you could make. I know it's not a one-to-one real-world example, because normally you have to tune the opacity and the colors as well to reflect the floor plan where you're able to see below the layer itself. But I hope it gave you some better understanding of what's actually possible with Home Assistant floor plan when you're exposing CSS variables through the Home Assistant service. And that actually brings us to the end of this video, even though I think we should touch just a bit about how you can check out the community, the documentation, and how you can buy me a coffee, as mentioned before. For those of you who are still around, I would like to point out that I've used the material-design-icons.com library to find both the reload and the music button. This resource are the same Home Assistant you're using itself, and you're able to download the SVG by pressing the code button, the view SVG, and the download SVG button. And now you should know that we have a great community over at Home Assistant Floor Plan in our discussion area, where you're able to raise questions and maybe even find other solutions, or even real-world examples and discussion about this video itself. We have a great documentation which you should take a look at if it's new to you. We have live examples in here as well. And lastly, I'll let you know that you're always able to support me by buymeacoffee.com/coffee2execute. And this brings us to the end of this video. I would like to thank you for watching till the end. Please use the like button if you find this useful, maybe even dropping comments if you like. And I will see you guys in the next one.